Last week, the New Development Bank, also known as the BRICS Bank, approved a $1 billion loan for South Africa. This to support the government's efforts in containing the economic impacts of the coronavirus. The funds are earmarked to help government create employment opportunities, particularly under the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. This program aims to support the creation of over 700,000 jobs in the public sector. Well, to discuss the loan and other matters further, I'm joined by Shanghai-based Leslie Maasdorp. He's the Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at the New Development Bank. Thank you very much, Leslie, for joining us. So this is the second $1 billion loan extension that you're giving to South Africa after the first one last year, which sought to address the immediate health crisis. What exactly is the agreement around where the latest funds will be transmitted? And of course, this translates to over 14 billion rands.
That is indeed correct. As you know, early last year, just around early second week of March or so, the New Development Bank announced a $10 billion economic program of assistance to the 5 BRICS countries, COVID response emergency program, as we called it. And we divided into two components. The first half of the 10 billion, 5 billion was allocated $1 billion each to the 5 BRICS countries, focused mainly on the short-term health-related expenditures. So we were trying to beef up and support our 5 respective governments in meeting the unanticipated needs for additional protective gear, ventilators, additional expenditure on the public health budget. The second phase has been a little bit more challenging because now we have to design economic recovery programs, or rather assist our governments, because the proportion of funding we're making available in this case for South Africa, $1 billion, only about 14 billion rand, is really a drop in the ocean in terms of what's required to resuscitate the South African economy. As you know, we've had one of the biggest contractions in our economy for a very, very long time. So this loan, like our other loans to the BRICS countries, is aimed at stimulating economic growth through employment creation.
Yeah.
You made reference to the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, which is earmarked to create 700,000 job opportunities. So this money will be directly devoted towards that effort.
And typically, what are the terms and conditions attached to loans of this nature?
So the New Development Bank is a development finance institution. So unlike other commercial institutions who typically have much shorter horizons because of the assets and liability sort of profile of normal commercial banks, we finance infrastructure which have a much longer tenor, much longer duration. So these loans, for example, have a 30-year period of repayment. So in the first 5 years, after we disburse the $1 billion to the government, in the first 5 years, immediately the government starts paying interest. But for the first 5 years, there's a grace period during which the capital amount is not repaid to us. So the government have a relatively long period of an additional 25 years to repay that $1 billion. So it makes the debt, therefore, a lot more sustainable. It's not like this would be an encumbrance on the government's debt pathway that for the next number of years they have to repay the bank. There's a much longer duration within which the bank can be repaid.
Yeah. Now, of course, among the BRICS members, the economic prowess of the various countries is very different indeed. Now, of course, South Africa has borrowed money, but have other BRICS countries also borrowed COVID-19 related funds? And what sort of challenges have they been facing? I mean, I'm thinking of China, for example, which can fill, a trough full of cash. I mean, did they have to come to the BRICS Bank for assistance at all?
So the pandemic, as you know, has affected the 5 BRICS countries in very differentiated manners. So the pandemic, as you know, started here in China, but within a matter of months, by the time June or so last year, when I returned from South Africa back to China, the pandemic was already well under control then. Now, here I live in Shanghai, as you know, and literally there are 0 cases of COVID here. So COVID has completely been managed. However, the economic fallout from the crisis is very real. So yes, indeed, China came to us. We have provided already $2 billion of support for economic recovery to China, and we have done the same for the other BRICS economies. At the moment, the two most affected countries from a pandemic perspective is Brazil, where the pandemic has reached really serious crisis proportions in terms of numbers of infections, numbers of deaths, and so on. Similarly, also in India. So those two countries are still faced with successive lockdowns and the economy going into contraction mode. South Africa is in relative terms in a better state today from a pandemic perspective, but the economic situation in South Africa requires a lot more medium-term strategies to turn the economic growth story around.
Indeed. Now, right now, the Africa CDC is in intense talks about the continent moving towards greater manufacture of vaccines and other relevant drugs in order to reduce the continent's reliance on other manufacturers and regions. If a half-decent plan were presented to the BRICS Bank, is this an initiative that you could possibly fund, bearing in mind that, of course, we'd be talking about supporting the African continent, not just South Africa, which is the only member of BRICS from the African continent?
So you are correct in pointing out that development banks, not just the New Development Bank, institutions like the World Bank, like the Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, and so on, we are structured in a manner that is best suited to deal with the global crisis of this nature. One, because we have a development mandate, if you like. Two, we operate across jurisdictions. We work across countries. Three, we have government as shareholders. So these are our natural partners, if you like, and we have long-term lenses. So we when you have challenges of this nature, like a global pandemic, development banks can really step in. However, there are some restrictions, though. So in our case, we are devoted to our five shareholders: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And at this stage, we are not able to lend, let's say, to Nigeria or Egypt or Tanzania or Kenya, other African countries. However, we would be very much supportive of an initiative by the development banks to see how we can coordinate our efforts better around the production of vaccines, because this should have been done right at the start, both in terms of the research into the vaccine, to the production, three, the distribution and the logistics of getting the vaccine to people. Ideally, this should really have been a public good where governments provided free of charge to every citizen. Unfortunately, it was not done like this, but there's still an urgent need that development institutions step forward and play this kind of role.
Indeed. Mr. Maasdorp, thank you very much for your time, sir. Leslie Maasdorp, the Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of the New Development Bank.